Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
What in the world is the United States trying to accomplish? Are we getting it done? And will your life get better or worse because of it? Well, 2020 has certainly been an interesting year so far. I don't have to tell you all. You're paying attention, you know. With a worldwide pandemic shifting everyday life and an unconventional presidential election in the United States underway, you might think that these are the most pressing issues that we're facing. But the very essence of our global society is hanging in the balance. Today, we're going to examine the U.S. reducing troops in Germany and South Korea, the thousands protesting in Russia, the oppression and potential massacre of ethnic groups in China, and refugees with no place to go. What is the United States trying to accomplish? Are we getting it done? And will your life get better or worse? Those are the critical questions we're going to answer today. But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on world relations without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, I hope you're still listening, because I know world events and world affairs aren't everybody's favorite cup of tea. But in all honesty, I'm very interested and excited about sharing today's episode with you, because there are very many things that are going on outside of the pandemic and our presidential election that will affect the future of the United States for people of all ages. And so I think it's very important that as we talk about the troop reductions and the protests going on in relations with China and Russia, and even the refugees, and what our policy is going to be moving forward towards supporting democratic overtures around the world, this is an episode I would really like for you to listen to and pass on. So without further ado, Justin, South Korea, right? We've got a dictator in the north who is supposedly the president's friend, but who is still trying to create nuclear weapons and blasting them off. And President Trump says he wants to reduce American troops in South Korea.
And why is that, Lance?
For the whole point of his troop reductions around the world, he wants to save money, and he feels like foreign countries should be paying more for our protection. In some respects in the article, one person comes out and says, a former Obama administration official said that the president's kind of acting like a mob boss, that running a protection racket, that we need more money if you want us to continue to do these things. But the troop levels in South Korea have been basically the same since 1970. So there hasn't been a big increase or reduction for the last 45, 50 years. In 1995, we charged the South Korean government $200 million to have these troops here. In 2019, there was an 8% increase from 2018, and the South Koreans paid $926 million. So it's increased, from 1995 to 2019, from $200 million to $926 million. But currently, President Trump wants to increase it fivefold to $5 billion a year. And as you might imagine, the South Korean government has balked at this. They're like, there's no way. And so the president has said, then, okay, you're not going to pay for this, then we're going to make a plan and take our troops away. The South Koreans came back with a 5-year offer of their own, said we'll increase it 13.6% in year one and 7% each year after. So in the 5th year, we will pay the United States $1.3 billion in year 5. So it would go up from 926 this year, go up a little bit each year to 1.3 billion in the 5th year. President Trump's response was, we'll take the 1.3 billion for 1 year. And historically, it's always been a 4 or 5 year plan between the two governments. So the president's saying, you want our troops, whether it's in South Korea or Germany or many other places, you need to pay for more of the cost. And who's not for saving money? but at the risk of what, I guess is my question.
Right.
So what do you think here, Justin? I mean, kind of laid out what's going on here in the negotiation process. You know, we have increased it.
There's a lot of places we have troops around the world, and I think we have seen sentiment at home shifting on some of this, especially in recent years over the last, 10 or 15 years, where people are becoming wary of us being involved in these never-ending, conflicts or these never-ending war zones. So I think does Trump talk about it from a save money standpoint? Yes. And I think his main interest is mostly centered around that. But I think there's a lot of people that are supportive of some of this, not so much because, and maybe they should care more about the money, but not necessarily because of the money component, but because they don't understand, especially in some place like Korea where we've been for so many years, right? They don't understand, why do we still need that many troops there? And again, we can get into why that is. I'm just saying, I think that part of the sentiment, part of the reason that Trump sees some support for this is there's a lot of people who feel like, why do we still have all these troops in these different places? And that's part of, to me, why we have to talk about this in the first place, is because we've also got reductions. I think it's starting to become a little bit of a theme, right? Trump is deciding to use the withdrawal of troops or the moving of troops in the case of Germany. And again, this also reported by the Wall Street Journal. The Pentagon says that it's going to move nearly 12,000 U.S. troops out of Germany and to Belgium, also relocating its major European headquarters to Belgium. It's going to move its F-16 fighters out of Germany, send them to Italy. And so they say that this, is still going to let them act as a deterrent to Russia. But that's part of remembering why they're there in the first place, right? Part of us having bases in all these different places is this idea that it kind of forces us to stay on good terms with the places that we have bases with, both from their standpoint and ours. I mean, if we have 30,000 troops that are in your country, right, you're probably going to be hesitant to do things that go too far. I mean, you might still get a little harsh with us here or there or whatever, but you're probably not going to launch an all-out invasion against the United States at a moment's notice, as we have a base situated in your country. It also obviously serves the purpose of being strategically good places to operate from. Say, if we did get involved in something with China or Russia, these are places that obviously, or North Korea, would act as substantial strategic locations. So there's a lot of reasons why we have them in the first place. But I think Trump has also realized, hey, if they don't want to do what I'm asking, I don't have to pull out all the troops, but I can pull out a number of troops to show them that I'm serious, and then maybe use that as a way to leverage them and convince them that they need to pay more. Because once they don't have what we're offering, they'll see how bad they wanted it. Of course, the other side, Lance, right, is they could decide to go get it from somebody else.
Well, and Germany, and with the troop removal in Germany, Trump's public rationale there is that the German government, headed by Angela Merkel, is not paying enough to NATO, which we know that Trump came in and doesn't like NATO anyway, or doesn't think we should be a part of it. The group that has basically stopped, if you want to argue that, a Cold War, a nuclear war from happening since 1945, with this alliance of European countries and the United States mostly. And we're winners in the, quote, Cold War that, communist Russia acquiesced, and now they're back in a much weaker form, at least than they were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when they were all over the world taking their ideas and we were trying to stop them. So NATO accomplished what it set out to do. And the question, I guess, could be raised, is it time to revamp NATO or take a look at it again? But you still have Russia and China out there who are doing what they can against democracies around the world. So you wonder about that. But if it's truly a negotiation ploy, as someone who has negotiated contracts before, don't you think that the South Koreans are willing to sign a 5-year deal just like always and increase it by over, 7% over each year? I mean, so if it's truly you want more money and you think they should pay for it, the South Koreans are willing to pay more. So do you hold, so is it really about the money? Or is he, because the president said he's going to bring troops home from Afghanistan. He hasn't. He's going to bring troops out of the Middle East, other places in the Middle East. He hasn't. He's going to bring troops home, from all these different places. And in 4 years, he hasn't done that. So now you could say, well, they haven't let him or whatever. But now he said, okay, so we're going to come at it at a monetary thing. Well, they're trying to meet his demands. And in truth be told, in Germany, they have 2 or 3 more years to pay their bill. Their bill's not due yet. I think it's 2 more years. So they still have 2 years that they can come up with the money. So is there something else going on? Or is this still not just a good deal monetarily for the United States? Do we reduce troop levels? We don't need this many troops in there.
I think, Lance, too, the perspective here is, as we're looking at the world stage, right, you've got what Trump's saying, but also what can be done. And part of his, let's pull troops out, let's bring them home mentality is he's learned that in some of these places, I think that he initially wanted to pull out troops, he's getting some more serious pushback from the military because they're saying, if we leave these places, some of these places in the Middle East right now, here's all this that we're going to lose, right? Or here's the additional danger we put in. Where, does reducing 12,000 troops in Germany really compromise our overall security? That's something I guess you'd have to ask somebody in the military. From a general standpoint, it doesn't seem so because we're still leaving a lot behind. At the same time, I think it's right, so it didn't work here, so now I'm going over here. That way I can still say I brought troops back because that was a promise. So it might be, yes, I'm talking about the monetary side, but at the same time, like you said, the evidence kind of suggests, well, but South Korea is saying they're willing to pay more, so is it really monetary? Because if it was, wouldn't you want to take that? Now, he may say, though, Lance, right, that it's not enough. And that, in the case of Germany, yeah, they may have longer to pay, but they should pay now because they've already had a lot of time. So I think it's kind of what's hard to get at sometimes when we analyze this stuff is it's hard to know exactly what the motivation is because it's not always super clear cut. Is it to deliver on the promise to bring troops back? Well, not in Germany's case because you're just moving troops. You're not actually bringing them back to the United States. There may be some that return, but not that many. In South Korea's case, maybe. So that's kind of why all of this is interesting is, why is it happening? But also what does it mean for us as we're doing that? Does it diminish our standing with South Korea and Germany? Coming up, Lance, we do have to look at what's going on in Russia, though, because we couldn't have a foreign relations episode with talking about Mr. Putin, President Putin in Russia. We're going to look at what's going on there. There's thousands protesting, Lance, thousands in Russia who are very upset right now with President Putin. And we're also going to look at some of the possibly permanent changes to our approach to China. So we've talked some about our allies and what's going on there, but let's talk some about these that we've actually already discussed in the context of moving troops away from areas that would give us a strategic advantage against Russia and China. Now we have to look at what's going on in Russia and China right now that may very well play into some of what's been going on with our troop reductions. To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The central questions today: what is the United States trying to accomplish? Are we getting it done? And will your life get better or worse as a result? Well, in the first segment, Lance, you and I got to discuss troop reductions. I think the answer there is there's a few different things the United States may be trying to accomplish. Is the United States getting it done? Well, some of that remains to be seen. I mean, I suppose it depends on your perspective of what we're trying to accomplish. But in some cases, yes, some of it is happening, and in other cases, it's not. And will your life get better or worse as a result? Well, I think we have to wait on that one because, as Lance and I have tried to convey right to our listeners before, foreign relations and part of why it's I think a little more complicated, Lance, and why some people have a distaste for it is it's hard to isolate any one thing, right? Because there's always so many factors at play that feed into how a certain scenario plays out. Even if the United States does X, another country might do Y, which changes the result of what we did as the United States. And that's part of why we have to look at now, Lance, what's going on in Russia. And this is again an article here from the Wall Street Journal. This is one that you may not have heard about, but I think, Lance, it's very important that we bring it up, because it's not every day that tens of thousands of people take to the streets in Russia to demonstrate against the arrest of a popular opposition party governor who was arrested earlier this month, Lance. And this is in Russia's far east. So we're talking about thousands of miles from Moscow. And this is a region that historically, not to take Lance's place here and give you the historical perspective, but has always kind of had a slightly cooler relationship with the capital in Russia, just because it is so far away. It's not as developed.
7 time zones, right? I think it's 7 time zones from Moscow. So, I mean, we complain, and if you work on the East Coast or West Coast, you probably complain about the time difference and having to try to get a hold of somebody in New York, or if you have family members on the West Coast and you live in the East Coast, the Eastern time zone, it just really messes up. Can you imagine trying to do business if the center of your government was 7 time zones away? I mean, that puts it in perspective as well. Not only the mileage and the trip and the travel, but you're basically, by the time they're shutting down is when you're starting. So it really makes it difficult to connect with the central government, or in that case, for the central government to keep its claws on you, so to speak, to keep an eye on what you're doing. That just kind of makes it easier for me to understand when you talk about that time zone difference and knowing how I have to connect with people on the West Coast.
Well, so much of the time when we talk about Russia, Lance, we're always talking about the Kremlin, which is, of course, in the capital, Moscow. And as a result, Moscow's pretty far. I mean, they're near the western edge kind of Russia. People, I think.
It's a European city,
right?
I mean, it's actually a European city, not an Asian city.
And that's what's so, I think, difficult sometimes when you talk about Russia. We all have to keep in mind just how huge Russia is in terms of landmass. I mean, it is it's the largest country in the world from a landmass perspective. So I think that's really important for people to keep in mind, because it helps you understand why could a far east region of the country feel so alienated. Well, one of the reasons for that is just because of the true distance, literally thousands of miles apart. And as Lance said, 7 time zones. And traditionally, this is a resource-rich area of the country. It also happens to be the gateway into China from Russia. So all of those go into this factor, Lance, that Moscow cares a lot about maintaining control over this area, but it's not nearly as developed as some of the other big cities in Russia. So it sits here, and these people feel kind of like they get taken advantage of. And that all kind of came to a boiling point when their governor, who was kind of elected in what some looked at as a fluke. I mean, everybody felt like, I think it was legitimate, but he was not expected to win. He is a member of the opposition party, which we know traditionally in Russia, if you're a member of that and you gain much steam, you get killed, or in his case, you get arrested, which is exactly what happened.
He was charged with a murder that happened 15 years ago.
It even further inflamed the situation, right? Because then not only did they arrest him on charges that obviously, Lance, they were so important, they waited 15 years to do anything about it. But not only did they do that, but then they replaced him with somebody who's never even lived there. So, to these people that already don't like Moscow and the way that they're treated, this is just a big old slap in the face. Not only did you arrest somebody arguably completely illegally, just because they didn't agree with you, but also then you put somebody in that you love who doesn't know us at all and who isn't qualified to represent us. So I guess, Lance, what this comes down to for me is the United States has been kind of silent on this. And this kind of goes in line with Hong Kong. Now, granted, we have spoken up on Hong Kong as of late. But it's kind of when Russia and China do these things, not just the U.S., but it seems like the world kind of gives them more of a pass, right?
Well, and with President Putin, it's really hard to get any negative talk from President Trump. But in the 7 or 8 conversations that President Trump admits to having with President Putin, no, that's never come up. So we have, at least in the United States right now, we don't say too much. And the other thing to talk about what's going on in Russia, that this region is also not seeing an economic boom in the time that Putin has become leader again. But what's interesting is in Russia, they just voted and changed some amendments that will allow Putin to run for the presidency 6 years in length each term for 2 more terms when this one is up. So he could basically be the leader of the country until 2036. And the referendum passed by almost 3/4 of votes. Now, in this region, it didn't pass. It passed with only like 60%, I think, barely, and with a lower turnout in this region. So obviously, they're not friends of the government. Another example of that. But Putin has set himself up that he can basically be dictators for life. I think I read in another article, he would be in his 80s by 2036. So he's basically set himself up that legally he can remain in control of the country. One reason we have a 2-term limit here in the United States is we don't want anybody to lead for that long, because even when FDR did it during the Depression and World War II, there were those people that were getting tired of him leading. That he got elected to a 4th term, but he died very shortly into the 4th term, but he led for 3 complete terms. And there were people that were really, 20% of the country, 30% of the country that voted against him in every election. But you mentioned China, and, we're taking a hardline stance with China. So why can't we take that stance with Russia, I guess was my take. With China, we're saying, you know what? We want it to be a more competitive environment. That this whole idea that Richard Nixon opened up back in the 1970s when he was president of trying to bring China in and make it part of the world, and that it would be, more part of the global economy. Even Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said China is deeply integrated into the global economy.
There's quote unquote, and I'm using air quotes here because I'm not saying I necessarily believe this, but I'm saying, is this part of the justification? Is it because there's more at stake in China? In other words, it's flashier. They're the world's 2nd largest economy. So taking a hardline approach on them, right, quote unquote, has the opportunity to gain us more. And that's where, right, you do a trade deal with China, and that has the potential to really affect things and affect them quickly, which we know President Trump likes to see fast results. Russia's more of a long-term, there's not, a lot of the things you can do with Russia don't really immediately, or at least they're not immediately seen in the everyday lives of American. If we put tariffs, right, on Chinese goods, or if we get a new deal and they buy hundreds of millions of dollars in additional ag products, that's something that farmers notice immediately, right? That's something that we're going to see on the grocery store shelves at some point. And with Russia, again, you and I understand, and I think a lot of our listeners understand the importance of why we have to pay attention to Russia, but it's not immediately felt. So you think, is that part of it? Is that part of why the difference in attention?
Well, to stay away from the conspiracy theories as to why.
Yeah, what do we know?
I think the main reason is, rightfully so, China is much more of a, quote, threat to the United States than Russia is. The Russia of the 21st century is not Russia of the Cold War. It is not the power that those of us who are older in America grew up remembering Russia or the Soviet Union and what it was. So I don't think there's that fear that there is with China of becoming a world dominant power. I think China has taken Russia's place as the number 2 behind the United States. So I think that's basically the main reason why we're more interested in China. I found this interesting, though, in the article. Russia is now the number 1 outside supplier of oil to China. That was always a real fear of the United States, that if China and Russia ever got together, we'd have a hard time handling them. And we did what we could to keep them separated. So you wonder if we're starting to maybe drive them together a little bit. I don't know. But as far as China's concerned, we have done everything we can, like you said, to create this more competitive adversarial relationship here. And our article that we're quoting today says that this is being done on purpose, that it's a movement that has support on both sides of the aisle, that this is what we need to do, that our attitude of bringing China in has not worked. We haven't been able to control it like we thought we would once we brought it into the world economy. And so, it is interesting to see now that there are just a whole lot of things going on here in China outside of just Hong Kong as a way to get away with a worse relationship. But can we do that? I mean, but this might be something we don't see. If President Trump stays, obviously, I think we'll see it continue. But this article tries to hint at the fact that even if we change presidents, this is a concept that we're going to see the United States pursue in the future. And I think that's why it's important to read up on this and talk about it, because we are, it looks like, getting ready as a nation, one way or the other, to take a stronger stance with China in the future. And how will that change our lives? As we talked about at the beginning of the show, will it make your life better or worse? The jury's out, but it's something you probably want to watch for because the change is occurring.
And these are the type of changes that not only shift our lives in the United States, but can shift the entire global economy. And as a result, further shift our own lives right here in the U.S. What you buy, where you get it from, and how much it costs. And the thing that you also have to be paying attention to, Russia and China, right, is the less we pay attention to Russia, the more room you're giving them to do what Putin wants, which is to go back to the Soviet Union. I mean, like Lance said, let's not forget who this gentleman is here. He has a history. He remembers the Soviet Union. And I think he would like for Russia to be in a position that they were once in, or at least a similar level of influence. Coming up, Lance, we are going to look at one of the areas where we're not taking a hardline stance on China, and maybe what needs to be done about that, because it's certainly a concerning situation. There's also a number of refugees, Lance, that are getting no attention, and in keeping with our mission at True Chat, it's very important that we take time to bring that to everybody's forefront, because as the United States, as the world leader, we should be paying attention to and bringing attention to all of these things that are getting ignored, where you have truly innocent individuals that are being persecuted, thousands around the world, and it should be our job to, at the very least, call it out. To find out what we're talking about, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
What in the world is the United States trying to accomplish? And yes, I am intending the pun there, just for anybody that's picking up on it. I'm sure Lance is. He's the king of our puns, so hopefully he's on top of it. But we've looked at so far today troop reductions around the world, South Korea, Germany, what's going on there with our allies. And then also, we've talked a little bit about Russia and China and what we need to keep an eye on there. China, as we closed last segment, we've talked about, it's definitely been getting a lot more attention lately. And up until just a few days ago, there was an area that was kind of being ignored by the United States. And that's where we left off at the end of last segment. But it's not being ignored any longer. The Trump administration, according to the Wall Street Journal, has imposed sanctions on a Chinese organizations and 2 current and former officials that U.S. officials say are linked to human rights abuses against the Uyghur Muslim population in northwestern China. Now, for those that don't know, the Uyghur population, and just for the record, Lance and I are not 100% sure of the correct pronunciation here. So if any of our audience knows, we appreciate it, but we'll go with the Uyghur population. They are, as mentioned in the article, primarily native to northwestern China, and they are a Muslim population. And To say that it's just human rights abuses, it's hard to know because China pretty well cracks down on outside reporting and outside information. But a lot of what we've seen, Lance, does indicate that these individuals are being rounded up, usually completely without any basis or claim other than the fact that they happen to be Uyghurs, and then are being shipped off to these. China has used different terms for them. The probably most accurate term that everybody would recognize is essentially a form of modern day concentration camps. I mean, China claims, Lance, that these are right, that they're taken good care of and that they're educated on on China and the history of China and how to fit in. And really,
detention centers is what the Chinese would say.
Right.
They're calling them detention centers that they're taking them to. Yes.
And really the way it works is they are held there usually for many weeks or months with no explanation and no education. And then all of a sudden they are presented with questions to answer, and they have to answer the correct way, or they might get beaten or punished. And once they start answering the correct way, then they have to do that long enough before they maybe get released, or they maybe just die, from a bad situation. So it's a pretty awful and terrible thing that's going on. And it is different. But we also want to mention, Lance, that there's kind of a refugee crisis right now with the Rohingya as well. They were actually fleeing and have been trying to get out of Bangladesh and headed for Malaysia. And one of the ways, and this is pretty common, Lance, in the refugee area, one of the ways that the different groups will get out is they will pay smugglers to take them on boats. And a lot of times they pay outrageous prices, like $1,000 in this case, per individual, which may not sound like a lot to all of our listeners. I mean, it's probably not nothing to most of us, but for these people, that's everything they have. And a lot of times more than what they have. They may have borrowed that or gone substantially into debt or sold everything they own in order to do it, because they literally are fearing for their lives. And now they're not being reunited with loved ones because some of these smugglers are demanding more money after they already set sail with them. And again, there's plenty of things the world could be doing, Lance, but it doesn't seem anything's being done. So in China, we've got this situation where people are being rounded up and taken to essentially concentration camps. And the U.S. is finally doing something, at least acknowledging it with sanctions and so forth. But the rest of the world doesn't seem to be doing much. And then you've got the Rohingya refugees that, again, are in this terrible situation where we could send in, a couple of medical ships and move them all at once if we wanted to. But again, we're not doing that. So what do you make of what's going on here, Lance? What can the U.S. be doing that we're not doing? What should the rest of the world be doing that they're not doing?
Well, what you have is you have a group of people in China who are one of the recognized minorities within the country. And then you have a group of people who have been thrown out of their country, who we've been talking about over the last year and a half and really haven't given you any updates about in the Rohingyas. And in both cases, these are people that are being mistreated by not only their home government, but in the case of the people of the Rohingyans, they're now trying to find a place to live. And the United States has historically been a beacon of light in the world for people like this. I think of the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, teeming to the shore and so on and so forth. But we've always kind of tried to help out these people and not necessarily bring them to the United States, because I know that's a touchy issue. But we've been like, they're coming to us, like the people in Hong Kong and things, asking us to protect them because they want democracy. They want liberty. They want just simple human treatment. And we're not there. And what we're finding out is if we're not going to be there, nobody else is stepping into the gap. And we're finding out there was an equal article that said something to the effect that, there's almost 10 times more refugees in the last decade. So that this is an oncurring piece around the world, and the United States now is stepping away from these kinds of people. Again, we have a choice to do that, right? I mean, we can make that choice, but if what we're finding out is if we don't do it, than nobody else is. And what does that say about us if we try to have relationships and go to trade with other people and get them as allies when they say, yeah, but when things get tough on us, are you going to turn your back on us? I just don't think it represents what the United States has stood for. So if this is where we're going, then it is a major change in the way the United States has dealt with refugees and helping people in other countries who are fighting for independence, who are being mistreated by their governments. And it's a sad state of affairs because I think this is something that historically has set the United States apart from the rest of the world. It's why we had so much support in becoming a world power, and we can trade with so many different countries, which then gives our goods places to be sold, so then it in turn helps our economy. So not only is it just from a humanistic side of us being good people, it also helps us economically when we treat people well, because it gives us more markets from which to sell our goods.
Well, and even in our modern day society, right? Part of goods is our services as well. And you look at the tech companies that the rest of the world relies on, they're mostly U.S. founded and U.S. owned and U.S. operated organizations. People can learn about these things and they can learn about them pretty quickly. And that's part of why we need everybody that is listening. We need your help to make sure that you're bringing people to this conversation. We talk about it at the end of every show, but today is a special one because foreign relations are not everybody's cup of tea. And really, I mean, if Lance and I are being honest, we talk about foreign relations, but there's lots of things that we probably quote unquote like better than foreign relations. At the same time, we also have come to understand just how important they are to everything, to literally our daily lives. And that's, I think, part of what is often the disconnect is not making that connection. So hopefully we've tried to drive home and break down some of these issues real briefly. We did it a little differently today, Lance. Often we'd spend a whole episode on any one of these things. So even though Lance and I could do that, we decided to try to take you down this road and take you through these different ones and give you a little bit on each, hopefully so that you have a better picture of it all holistically as opposed to just diving real deep on one of them. So if you liked it, please do let us know. There is a plethora of articles for today's show. I think this might be the record, 6 articles in a single show, 5 Wall Street Journal, 1 New York Times. They're all linked at thestateofus.org. So Lance, why did you and I take time to hopefully break this down for people and make it more real for them? What is the purpose of what we're trying to do here?
Well, our mission here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And that's what drives every one of our shows and every one of our discussions, not only on The State of Us, but on the entire network. And we need you to let your friends know. And the way they can find us is on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and anywhere else fine podcasts are found.
For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, for getting all this together. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.